Good morning, and welcome to Connections Radio Show, where we talk about ideas that matter. As you know, on our show, we like to explore all kinds of connections to ourselves, our community, and the world around us. I'm Lori Fitz, your host, and it's the first Saturday of the month, and so you know what that means. It's the Eastside Freedom Library time. And I have Peter Ratcliffe, who is my co-host today, joining us, who has brought a guest who is going to be also a part of the Eastside Freedom Library. Welcome, Peter.
She is indeed.
There we go.
Yes.
You've just been here almost a week now.
Yeah, I'm actually on day 3.
Well, actually, I think at this point, day 6?
Yes. Day 6.
We agreed on day 3.
We agreed. Okay.
So, Chitra Viravin.
Viravin.
I will make sure that next time I will make that a long I. You're the new operations manager.
I am.
I'm excited to have you here, and I want to learn all about what brought you here and your interest and all that good stuff. But for folks who don't know about the Eastside Freedom Library, which I'm shocked if there are folks out there that don't know about the Eastside Freedom Library. If you listen to my show, you know that the first Saturday of the month, we dedicate it to the Eastside Freedom Library. But just in case you've just tuned in and you haven't, Peter, would you share the overview of how you talk about the Eastside Freedom Library?
Well, we say that our mission is to inspire solidarity, work for justice, and advocate for equity for all. In order to inspire solidarity, we know that we have to respect and appreciate and understand the specific cultures of the diverse communities that make up the East Side and the greater Twin Cities. We provide resources, particularly books, materials through the Hmong Archives, which is co-located and a partner with us. And we curate programs using art and culture as vehicles for people to tell their stories, share their stories, explore similarities, and build that solidarity with each other.
I love that it's both a place that you can come and learn about someone else's story, as well it's a place that if you're an artist or an academic or someone who cares about community can bring something and lead. It's a great leadership followership that is in constant motion at the Eastside Freedom Library in St. Paul.
Right, on the east side of St. In a historic Carnegie Library. We hope every day that whatever is left in Andrew Carnegie's grave is rolling over at what we're doing with the resources that he gathered from immigrant iron miners and steel workers and coal miners to make possible for us to do what we do.
I do like that you always mention that it's the laborers that built the Carnegie fortune, so it is right and good that the laborers are able to celebrate it at your Eastside Freedom Library.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, we've got a great set of things coming up in the Eastside Freedom Library for the month, and we're going to be sharing about those throughout the show, but particularly at the end. So stay with us throughout the whole show so you can hear all about the wonderful multicultural programs that will be offered at the Eastside Freedom Library. But in this segment, I want to start to get to know our friend Chitra. And Chitra, you have just joined, as you said, this is your first week.
Yes.
You must have heard about the Eastside Freedom Library at some point.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
yes.
Tell me about how you first learned and your first experience with the Eastside Freedom Library.
I first learned about the library through a very good friend of mine who is an artist activist herself. And she was working for the Eastside Freedom Library at the time. And so she brought me in for an event there.
What was the event?
It was focusing on Ananya Dance Theater, which is a dance company that I'm the co-founding member of.
So you not only went, you were participating.
I was participating, and I was very integral to that
It was a nice place
event.
to go and perform.
At the time, I had just started my solo artist career, so I came in, knowing that part of history and also getting to know this new space, the Eastside Freedom Library, through her.
So tell me about how it felt to perform there and the individuals that attend, and what's the community like that are part of the Eastside Freedom Library?
I didn't exactly perform there, but it was for a particular program that evening. Mm-hmm. And so what I really enjoy about the library is that it's been a space for multiple communities and organizations to be there and talk about their stories and their work. And so my first experience with the library was through work that was being spoken about that was very integral to my artistic work. So I didn't really get to know the library per se at that specific event, but through my friend and through getting to know sort of the literature, the activists, and the artists that had all been a part of the library, I came to know more and more about sort of the direction the space was heading in. So,
Peter, you must be proud. 5 years that you've been working on this library, and it keeps growing and expanding with both staff and resources and opportunities. In reflecting and seeing this new member being brought to the fold, tell me your thoughts in growing your organization.
Well, for people out there who are familiar with the peculiar language of nonprofit speak, that we have been trying to build our organizational capacity, which involves raising money in order to be able to afford to put on staff. And we've had an interesting and I think valuable path of relying heavily on volunteers whom we call collaborators. To help us build capacity. But in order to really build sturdy systems, we need people whose total focus is on the library and the kind of work that we're doing. And so we need staff. So a year and a half ago, we added our first full-time staff person, Clarence White. And we then have engaged in a fundraising process to come up with the resources to hire a second staff person, Chitra. And we had 65 applicants for the position. We interviewed 9 people, and the search committee was unanimous. She has the difficult task of trying to impose some order on the kind of creative chaos that life often is at the Eastside Freedom Library.
Systems can be good.
Systems can be good.
But it's a challenge to, especially with creative energy and being able to look at your strategy and strategic plan to build to the future, I'm sure, as well.
Right. And, how to identify. We now have a mailing list of about 6,000. How can we identify who on that mailing list is going to be interested in a particular project or kind of activity? And how can we become more effective in reaching people and saying to them, hey, this is the stuff that you want to come around for? And then helping us think, which I think is the hardest challenge, helping us think about how do we get people to step outside of their own comfort zones and familiarity and take a chance on coming to an event that may not be in their own sweet spot and that may involve risking
challenging conversations.
Challenging conversations with people from other communities who might be bringing other baggage into the room with them.
And real issues that the community is facing.
Absolutely. One of the things that we have been working on now for 4 months is trying to bring together people in the various East African diasporas to talk about political and social change in the Horn of Africa. And what can people in the Eritrean, Oromo, Amhara, Somali, Sudanese communities, with the resources and interests that they may have here in Minnesota, what roles can they play to bring about democracy and justice for their family members who are still back there or where they may yet want to return to? What kind of roles can they play, and how can they develop conversations with each other in order to pursue that? So we're very excited that we were asked by activists in the local Eritrean community if we would host the former Eritrean ambassador to the European Union, which I believe still exists, despite the attempts of certain people.
And certain countries.
Yes. But we're excited to have this very experienced Eritrean political activist in our midst, and to bring Oromos, Amharas, Somalis, Sudanese into conversation with him, and again to talk about how all of their lives can be improved. And then a week later, on Saturday, a week from now, we will be hosting the rhythmic literature folks, who are largely Amharic language poets. And we will be hoping that people from other communities will come and present poetry in Tigrayan and Oromo.
And in that poetry, as I recall, it's in their native language.
Absolutely,
Which is
in there.
fabulous.
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah. I mean, and they're actually quite adamant about the particular beauty of their language, of the sounds of their language, and the ways how metaphorical their language is. And so, these are ways that we're bringing
Cultures to life.
poetry
Yeah.
and political discussion across the boundaries of different communities
When
together.
I hear you talk about these events, I'm often reminded of the 60s notion of, think globally and act locally. But with the advent of the internet, it takes it up a notch, because it's not just developing nice local activities. It can make an impact globally. It can make real difference. I know that you've done work all around the world in the Eastside Freedom Library.
Right. These conversations with East Africans are being Facebook live streamed, and upwards of 20,000 people around the world
Amazing.
are watching these conversations.
Well, more about those conversations and more discussion with Chitra and your background coming up in our next segment. And you're listening to AM 950, the progressive voice of Minnesota, on Connections Radio Show. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show. I'm your host, Lori Fitz, and it's the first Saturday of the month, so we have my co-host, Peter Ratcliffe, who is the co-executive director of the Eastside Freedom Library. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you.
And we also have Chitra Vairavin,
Yes.
who has joined the Eastside Freedom Library, and we're going to have a chance to get to know her in this segment. So, Chitra, tell me about your background. You'd mentioned in our last segment that you have a solo dance company.
I am a solo artist.
Solo artist. So
Yeah,
tell me more about
yeah.
that, and tell me more about your background and all the good things that you're bringing to the Eastside Freedom Library.
Yeah, I'm an artist and an administrator. I've been an artist since probably the age of 2, dancing, creating performance art, and then started my professional sort of arts path after being one of the co-founding members of Ananya Dance Theater, which is a women artists of color collective that is based here in the Twin Cities. And from there, I had also been working with a lot of activists and community members at the same time. So I got this artist side of myself and this administrator half of myself going.
Using
and-
both sides of the brain.
Absolutely.
The logical left and the creative right, and,
Yes.
and blending them together.
Yes, and I needed both. And so I'd worked for 10 years at the University of St. Thomas Interprofessional Center at the time for some law professors and juvenile justice advocates, working with law students doing their clinicals for the first time. So I used to day job, do this, and then have my artist, work going on at
So
the same
almost
time with
two
the dance
different
company.
lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so now with this role at the Eastside Freedom Library, I'm realizing both things are happening, and I'm weaving in and out of being an artist and organizer, as well as being an administrator who is, figuring out systems and how to set things.
I think there's a great benefit to artists having an artist as the administrator, because there's sensitivities that artists aren't always comfortable with limitations, even though there's great creativity. I believe creativity works really well with boundaries, and how to set those boundaries in a way that can be heard and understood, and not act as a stopping of the art, but an opportunity to do the best art within a framework. So tell me about some of the frameworks that you think might be helpful that you'd love to bring and create.
So in terms of my personal artistic work, I'm working on a movement series called Balance and Boundaries.
Perfect.
And I know. That's why when you mentioned it, I was like, I
perfect.
need to talk about this. And a lot of my work is also centered on liberation, particularly in Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. And so I'm interested in making that offering towards specifically those communities, centering their narratives and what does liberation look like for them, and offering them sort of designing experiences where they can find that through movement, through performance, in various, not just dance, but also literary artists and visual artists and organizers who are all looking for more embodied ways of moving through within their work. So it is very sort of cross-disciplinary, and we are focusing also on boundaries and balance. So, but it's an ironic thing because it's a liberating practice.
Yes.
But also within the bounds of a certain design.
And discipline.
Absolutely.
To create that boundary.
Yeah.
When you talk about all types of art, another image comes to me of something someone told me once, that when a child learns to walk, actually they dance first. And when a child is given a crayon before they can write, they draw. And when they're first making sounds, they're not words, they're song. So how do we tap into that innate artistic wealth that we have within us, that we naturally move towards art, that somehow gets faded or disciplined into a different area? And re-tapping into that is, I believe, tapping into each one of our artistic souls.
Yeah. That's reminding me of, somebody asked me what my artistic practice was or what the process was at this point. And now with the sort of centering liberation and healing work, I know that I'm onto something when that rational part of my brain has shut off and like something else takes over, right? It becomes more of a sort of energetic and spiritual practice. And then I know I'm onto something, and that's, I'm keeping whatever is happening at the time. But I think that taps into something that's beyond our sort of verbal rational consciousness. And so then the art gets lifted in a I guess beyond human way. Yeah.
So in interacting with artists and activists and academics, my guess is you're going to have an opportunity to work with a wide variety of individuals in helping them bring their ideas to life.
Yes.
Tell me about your ideas and how to make that happen.
So I find a lot of energy in working with people working in multiple disciplines and with different ideas and practices, but towards some kind of change and liberation, towards some kind of, there's a thread there that still exists.
Just as you were talking about in your boundary and balance.
In the movement series. Yes, absolutely. So I think that through working with those people, there are always connections that can be made and collaborations that can organically happen. But it's also not about a controlling of it. Like Peter had mentioned earlier, communities come and they're saying, we want to make this event in this space. And so there's a lot of power in people asking and already invested in what they're doing. And they believe that this space or this person or this experience is going to take, is the mode to go forward. And then you are just facilitating, designing, making it happen.
Or helping them get to the next level.
Yeah.
Because they may be at one place, but understanding the opportunity might widen their scope or focus their interest.
Yeah. And it's a shared power dynamic, right? So it's not like, I just came up with the idea or this space existed in it. It's coming from the people who are already interested in making that happen. So, yeah.
So, Peter, how blessed you are to have such a wonderful, energetic, artistic, and someone who's got a background in administration.
Absolutely, yeah.
So when you were going through your interviews, and you said that it was unanimous for our friend Chitra, was there a special moment that everyone sort of knew this is an idea that she gave, or something that hit all of you that went, yes, this is the way forward?
I'm not sure that she used the word, but she definitely communicated that she didn't have any time for hypocrisy.
Good for her and for you all.
Darn right.
Yeah,
you know,
authenticity.
and transparency.
Totally thought they weren't going to like me after.
Let me gonna tell you, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And
And if you can't deal with it now, you
That's
probably
right.
don't want to
Yeah.
hire me.
That's right. That's right. And
a no nonsense.
And then
yeah.
one of the people on the committee said, watch out, you may actually get what you're looking for. And I think that was after the interview with Chitra. And I'm thrilled that we're getting what we were looking for. And and I think we're a small enough organization that she's going to have a hell of an impact. And that's what we want, that we don't have any perfect ideas.
No.
And they're formed in struggle and in collaboration.
But I think what's important when we look at multicultural, and we're looking at inclusive leadership, there needs to be leadership that represents the view of where you're going. And I think as you build your staff and you're building the multicultural staff, you're living your commitment, and that's important. So we'll be back after just a couple commercials, and we'll hear more about what's going on at the Eastside Freedom Library and things to put on your calendar. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show. And it's the first Saturday of the month, so we always celebrate the Eastside Freedom Library. And for more information on the Eastside Freedom Library, I encourage you to go to their website. It has not only a great background on the work that they do, but it also has a terrific calendar of all the upcoming events. And that's eastsidefreedomlibrary.org. And today I have my co-host, Peter Ratcliffe, who is also the co-executive director of the Eastside Freedom Library. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Always great to be here.
Always great to have you. And we have Chitra Vairavan,
Yes.
who is the new operations manager and who also will be doing programming at the Eastside Freedom Library. So tell me about an upcoming program on December 23rd, Peter.
Well,
I'll let
mean,
you
I think
introduce.
sure.
Yes.
I think that this is a great sort of illustration of how much Chitra is bringing to our community in our work. That so she's talked about balance and boundaries, talked about finding a thread of liberation that runs through the work. So there's a framework, and then she's outed herself as a solo performance artist and primarily dancer, and obviously of South Asian ancestry and background. And so if you think you know her, you don't yet, because
I think
she's,
Chitra's still discovering who Chitra is.
well, I
I
think
don't know
we
if
all
I'm
are.
discovering,
Yes.
but I'm on a journey.
Yes.
There you go.
I'm becoming always.
Yes, right,
Yes.
right. But Chitra is going to lead a writing workshop. Maybe there will be some movement, I don't know, but a writing workshop sponsored by MISNA, the Arab American organization, which has recently had this marvelous
Fundraiser.
exhibit, the
Exhibit two,
exhibit
yeah.
at the M, the Minnesota Museum of Modern Art. And so they're working in multiple disciplines as well.
Yes.
But I'm very excited. One of the first things that Chitra did when she came on board was ask whether Sunday afternoon, December 22nd, was available, and that she wanted to do a writing workshop co-sponsored by MISNA.
Got
And
that
so-
operations calendar out right away.
So,
right away.
yeah.
Right away. Although, I'm a handwritten guy and she's a Google Calendar person.
Fabulous.
We still have to work that out. But I thought, well, maybe you could say a little bit about how you're
So it's
approaching
not
this
so much a
workshop.
co-sponsorship, but I'm a part of the writing group for MISNA. So, and I have been for about a year because part of my practice is I write. Poetry very much informs my movement practice. And I know many of the MISNA poets and writers and have been building relationships with them for some time. So after a couple of sessions in their writing group, they asked me to co-lead, the next writing group meeting, and they already know me as a performance artist as well. So we're gonna be doing poetry and embodied movement. And I also was like, no pressure. Not everybody has to dance or move or perform, but we're gonna talk about performance as a part of poetry and sort of in the literary field as well. So, it just happened to be a beautiful sort of experience that was happening at the same time, because they were also looking for space for the meeting, and I was going to start this new job, and they were already interested in being involved in the Eastside Freedom Library. So it just made sense to be in the space.
You were saying in the last segment that, when the intuitive takes over and the logic goes behind.
Yeah.
For me, a process is working or something is taking over when it seems like the stars keep aligning.
Absolutely.
It's effortless almost when
and I
things
will
come
say
together.
So much of being in this role, the stars were aligning with me in multiple ways in all my artistic work and sort of belief, my social justice core. Everything was aligned, in this opportunity, and so I had to move with it.
And what I also love is that you are doing what you are going to encourage others to do, which
Yes.
is you're signing up for space. You are having a cultural experience.
Yeah.
It is both a writing and a movement that taps into both of your loves.
Yes.
And you can speak from experience to others about what the process is like.
Yep.
And how you can encourage others to take advantage of the opportunity of the space. And having more cultures take part at the Eastside Freedom Library, I think enriches it just to another level again.
One of the things is I don't always look at representation and sort of multiculturalism in that way. We're all people of difference, and we tend to box ourselves up into certain practices and certain, identities, and the world does that to us, because we're taught to sort of compete with each other for resources and sort of say, like, this is who I am, this is my background. Not to demean, like, your ancestral roots and all the work you need to do to understand your history and what brought you to this land, right? But I think that, one of the parts of this liberation work I'm talking about is to actually know that, yes, all of this, but you are also beyond all of that, and it's about connecting and collaborating in terms of practice and histories and stories that are integral to creative work.
And stories do bring us together.
Yeah.
And I think that they create the connection for empathy, ideally, that becomes the goal of how do we not make judgment? How do we check when we may have judgment within us?
Yeah.
And that can be best learned through story. And I think culture, and yes, we all have our own unique spark that needs to be shared. But I'm a big advocate of understanding cultures, a big advocate for not letting that stop the journey of learning, and not labeling or stereotyping or separating, or, as you say, competing for resources.
Yeah.
But how do we create the us and not the us and them? How do we move past the us and them and celebrate many cultures creating an us?
I'm thinking as you're talking, I'm like, there's also a power dynamic involved in, like, who are we calling us and them, and who is framing the narrative?
Right.
How is sort of the inequities, how are they being acknowledged, within the experience? So even with this idea, I don't want to, like, we're all one, colorblind kind of thing. Because we're not.
Right.
Yeah.
And that
so
would be,
you always
that
need
would be
to
insulting.
acknowledge yeah, absolutely. So, like, when we talk about culture, we really need to sort of define what we mean by that in multiple frameworks.
So tell me more about that.
I mean, that can be a whole nother.
And we will. Perhaps we will. But give us a taste of what are the things that you think are important to think about when it comes to culture.
I think that culture has multiplicity. I think that it can be used. One of the powers of using that word is because it already has an ability to be framed in through multiple ways. So like you could be talking about culture from a historical perspective, like sort of racially or ancestrally, sociologically. You can also talk about culture in terms of sociopolitically, like what is the political culture? What is I'm thinking about cultural activism as well, because it looks beyond, sort of the certain boxes of identifying something from just one point of view.
Which can lead to the stereotyping and lead more boxes
It can lead to
of separation.
Yeah, it can lead to not having a more nuanced perspective about what something is or who something is. So my perspective. Yeah.
And mine is similar in that I believe that it's it's the place to begin. And it is like the ongoing learning. It is lifelong learning. Culture is not something a one and done.
Yeah, it's not static.
No, and that the discoveries that you can
Constantly
make.
changing.
And the discoveries you can make of your own. Oh my gosh, that's an assumption I just made. I do a lot of work with unconscious bias, and I love this one group. After we'd worked with them for a while, they were going, oh, my bad, my bias. And it was no longer shame. I think shame gets involved of not doing it right or wrong.
Yeah, right.
But how can we first look at our own way that we've made judgments and really drill into them? And I think that's what the vulnerable conversations and the difficult conversations, being willing to be wrong, being willing to bring our stuff and go, ooh, I've made some mistakes in the ways I've looked at things.
Yeah.
Help
I
me.
think that's one of the beautiful things about the Eastside Freedom Library, too, is that there is space to make mistakes and come at it differently, because when you are kind of small and sort of already grassroots and working with communities, there are mistakes being made all the time.
You can't help
and
it.
there's not, we're all adapting and learning and, making things better. And it's actually really powerful to see and to be a part of.
And to see the changes that can be made when we are vulnerable and when we do admit and when we are truly open to looking at learning together and figuring out what community means. Yeah. And what does the culture of the Eastside Freedom Library mean? You're developing a culture there as well as celebrating a multiplicity of cultures.
Yeah.
So some other things that are happening. Tell me about the Hmong visual art.
Yeah, I think that this conversation really sets the stage very nicely. So first, the idea that this was a project that the artists came to us with. They are two Hmong photographers, Jim Vu and Sai Tao. And they see themselves very much as part of the second generation of Hmong Americans, and are really wrestling with what is their relationship to the culture that their parents brought with them when they came from refugee camps in Thailand, and what are they creating? How are they really, as Chitra has used the term of becoming, how are they becoming? And how can they use the visual art of photography as a way to explore that? So they work with a group called In Progress, which is a group of largely second-generation Hmong Americans. Jim came to us 3 years ago with an analytical project that he was working on as a graduate student at Metro State about what he defined as the problem of nostalgia in Hmong and Hmong American culture.
And my guess is for every immigrant
of course.
community, you get to a point of
Right. I mean, you both need to know
Yes.
the specific, but you can also see the general patterns in what they're struggling with. And in their case, Jim was very aware of and concerned about the ways that the art of making pandao was being commodified, and that consumers, people like you and me, Lori, who would buy story cloths, pandao,
I've got
wanted
one
them,
in my home.
of course, and so do I, but wanted them to tell a certain kind of story. Are the elephants in it? Are the tigers in it? Is this a rural setting? And so how does an art form get frozen in time and
become
the artists,
static?
and become static while the artists are also looking for a way to make a living? Maybe they can get some income if they're providing the artwork that they think the consumers want to
Interesting.
purchase.
Interesting.
And so coming out of those issues, Jim and Cy, who are life partners, have created this visual art exhibit, which opens tomorrow at 1 o'clock Sunday afternoon. At the
And
East
runs
Side-
through the rest of the
runs
month?
through the rest of the
perfect,
month.
perfect.
And there will be a discussion with them and other of their cohort of this Hmong American creative, nuanced, becoming thinking for us all to learn from.
So go to the Eastside Freedom Library starting tomorrow and to the rest of the month. And if you want more information, again, it's eastsidefreedomlibrary.org. A great exhibit and a great place just to get to know. We always like to bring a little bit of the Eastside Freedom Library on the air so that audience can get a taste of it. But go do the real thing. It's a great place. And we'll be right back after just a couple of commercials. Welcome back to Connections Radio Show. It's been such a joy to have a chance to be talking about the Eastside Freedom Library with my co-host Peter Ratcliffe and their new operations manager, Chitra Vairavan. We've been talking about things that Chitra is going to be doing and her vision and her background, talking about some programs coming up. In this last segment, we want to make sure we hit some more of these programs at the Eastside Freedom Library to get them on your calendar. You can also go to eastsidefreedomlibrary.org, but this is a good chance for us to share a little bit more that you might not see on the website. So first, I want us to talk about the art project that's at the county courthouse. Tell me more about that.
Well, I imagine that most of the people listening are pretty well aware that the last couple of years all around the United States, there's been a great deal of debate, discussion, controversy about how we memorialize the past, the monuments to the past.
Particularly in Virginia, it seems like there's some great
Well, I
debate.
think it's been all over the
Yeah,
place.
yeah.
And right here at home, here in St. Paul, there has been a long discussion, a heated discussion, about the murals in the city council chambers in the building that is peculiarly shared ownership by the city of St. Paul and by Ramsey County. And these are murals that were painted when the building was constructed in the early 1930s. And there are people in our Native American community, African American community, and critical thinking white folks who have questioned the ways that people of color are represented in these murals. And after quite a...
Which gets back to the power dynamic that we talked about
Oh.
in the last
who
segment.
gets
yeah.
to tell
Yeah.
somebody else's story
Yeah,
and,
and
how
how
do they
they are.
tell it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and there have been both Native American and African American people who have said that they have found it difficult to sit in the city council chambers, having come in for some issue of importance to them, and to see graphically depicted on the wall behind the city council scenes and images that make them feel victimized and uncomfortable and
portrayed in ways that are not representative. Are these murals actually in the wall itself?
Yes,
So
yes.
it's not something that you can just easily take down.
No, no.
It's embedded.
No, but part of these debates, and I'm a historian and very attuned to the way these debates have unfolded, have been questions about, just covering them over, or creating new art that engages those murals. And I'm very pleased that the Ramsey County Historical Society, that was given the task of figuring out a process, came up with the idea that, and the resources, that they would commission 4 new works of art that engage the existing murals. And I know
leaving the murals.
leaving the murals
for
up,
historical whatever.
right, and to say, whoa, in the early 1930s,
This is what people
this
thought.
is what people were thinking, and it doesn't help us to erase or ignore that was the situation.
Because then we can forget,
Right,
too.
right. So we are going to hear from the artists, and the Ramsey County Historical Society and the artists will be at the Eastside Freedom Library on the 16th of December at 7 in the evening, and they want to hear from community members about what they would like to see represented in the new art that's going to be created.
Cool.
And I'm
so
just
these are
tickled that-
artists, but they have not necessarily created the piece yet.
Oh, no, right.
They're in that
Right.
that early stage
Right.
of what should we question and
Right.
what should be part. How cool
Right.
is that you could actually
Right.
have
That's awesome.
input into art?
Yes. Yeah. So, what does democracy mean? This
Yeah.
is a pretty good exercise
Because
in democracy.
ideally, this might be with us another 100 years,
Right.
Just as this has been with us almost 100
Right.
years.
Absolutely.
And who knows, in 100 years, maybe they would be questioned as well.
Right. And
And-
hopefully they will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because culture is not static.
Because
Which we
exactly,
also.
exactly.
But a lot of visual art has community-based practices. So I think this is in line with having those commissioned artists engaging
Yeah.
with community again and really
Yeah.
rethinking and
Yeah.
having multiple input, into what they're creating.
Yeah. So,
Fabulous.
please, if you're listening, come on down and join in that conversation.
And what date is that again?
That's on the 16th.
Okay.
Monday evening, the 16th of December. And in the weekend just before that, I want to encourage people to come and see a remarkable playwright and performer, Antonio Duke, who has created a solo performance piece called Missing Mississippi Moons.
Will it be the whole piece or?
Oh
or-
yeah,
oh,
it's the
okay.
whole
Not
piece.
just excerpts
Oh,
and
no,
discussion.
No.
Okay.
Right. And Antonio was in the library almost a year ago with the Black Ensemble Players, who presented an absolutely stunning adaptation of Shakespeare's, an all-black performance of Shakespeare's A
yeah.
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Yep.
And he had such a good time that he wanted to come back and work in the space again, this time with his solo piece.
Now it's-
And so that'll be Friday night, the 13th, Saturday night, the 14th, and Sunday afternoon, the 15th.
And people could go to the eastsidefreedomlibrary.org to get the specific times.
Yes, to get the specific time. So we're excited to have Antonio coming back.
I remember last year us talking about, and I believe we had him as a guest, or he called in. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes,
Terrific,
yeah,
great
yeah.
guy.
And then on a slightly more library academic kind of front, though I'm sure it won't unfold that way, we're having a book discussion with Chris Lehman about his new book, Slavery's Reach, which is a book about the power and influence of slaveholders in Minnesota. They did not own other human beings in the state of Minnesota, but they came here with their money and resources
That benefited from.
that benefited from slavery and that positioned them to have an influence. It's sort of part of the answer to how come that lake in Minneapolis was called Lake Calhoun? And we're going to find out why some of the streets around the Eastside Freedom Library are called Magnolia and Hyacinth. So come and find out.
Come and find out. And Happy New Year. We're going to be celebrating
That's right.
Eastside Freedom Library next January. So come listen to us and come to the programs.
So stressful.
Oh, was it? Oh, was it? Oh, I try to make it as
dynamics.
easy as